Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our ranking tier list. We're moving now into the really, really, really good stuff. All right. Some surprises still on the list, though, aren't there? Above Sulamando, and this is where it gets really tricky, is the Black Temple. Why is the Black Temple not higher, Mike? Well, it has some lame ducks in it, unfortunately. The Black Temple has some really lame ducks inside, which is a bummer, because Illidan is easily the most... I think it's the most epic fight they ever made. I think the Illidan encounter at the top of the Black Temple is easily the most epic encounter Blizzard have ever created. There's nothing about that fight that isn't just magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. You've got him fucking flying in the sky, shooting his laser beams everywhere. You've got these giant elementals that you've got to deal with. You've got parasites. You've got everything that should be there. But goddamn are some of these fights getting there absolute dog shit. We could talk about Supremus, which Supremus is what they showed in the trailer for the Black Temple. Remember, the Black Temple was the first raid, despite it being like after KARAZHAN, GRUUL'S Lair, MAGTHERIDON'S Lair, SERPENTSHRINE Cavern, the Eye. All those raids came out of the Burning Crusade launch, which they're not in, I think, in the new version. I think they mentioned that on BlizzCon Online. They're going to stagger that release. The Black Temple was the first raid that was added later, so it got its own trailer. And Supremus was one of the fights we saw, and we were like, what the fuck? That thing is enormous. Whoa, that's cool. Awful fight, one shot. Highwall on Agentis was just really boring. Lots of very tedious trash to get there. Shade of Akama is garbage. Terran Gorefiend, which I enjoyed Terran Gorefiend. My guild enjoyed it, but occasionally Terran Gorefiend could be a problem. It had Reliquary of Souls, which visually is just astounding. And actually, as the main tank who gets to do the spell reflect on deaden and things, that was actually really good. But then you had, I forget his name, Gurtog, Blood Boil, awful fight. Mother Sharaz, where I literally had to stand AFK because of how that fight mechanically worked. And then we had the Council, I forget their name, whatever the Council fight was in there, which was also just absolute trash. So the Black Temple has the most epic fight I think has existed in World of Warcraft, in my opinion, which is the Illidan encounter. But it's like 8 out of 10 bosses are just trash in there, which is a real bummer, and lets it down for me. But it does have Illidan, so what can you do? In that vein, then, what raises it above that is the Temple of QIRAJ. Yeah, as an overall experience, I prefer the Temple to Black Temple. I prefer QIRAJ to the Black Temple. And that's because what scale and what wonder they created with that raid. The build-up to it, with the AQ event, the opening of the doors, never having experienced anything like that in World of Warcraft before. I mean, obviously people had a bit of expectation of what would happen in Classic this time around, but to be a part of this mystery as to what was going to happen, and to see the armies flow out of the temple when the gates did open, was great. Just to be fighting in the sands of Silithus with the entire server. It really felt like an MMORPG. That's what it felt like, and it's something that's definitely been lost over the years. It felt like the denizens of Azeroth came together as one to fight back this menace. Also, we did see the raid guilds just run inside the raid and not bother with any of that, but for us plebs, who weren't raiding it the moment it launched, it was a good experience. But then you get in there and they gave you the mounts. You had all these... It felt like a care had been put into what this should be as an underground insect burrow. The bosses aren't great, though, which is a bummer. The Prophet Scarum is garbage. The Bug Council is garbage. I forget his name. The Wiggly Worm after the Gauntlet is garbage. Battleguard Sectura is pretty garbage. Similar to Black Temple. He's got a vibe, but it is carried by its scale. And then, of course, Cthulhu. I actually like the Twin Emperors. I think the Twin Emperors were interesting, if mechanically a little stagnant. I had an awful job there as a priest at this point. I had a one warrior who I was to take care of, and his job was to run around and pick up the bugs that got sort of activated. So me and him just ran around the entire fight while the rest of the raid did other things. But then, of course, you get to Cthulhu, and if you weren't there, for any of you original Vanilla Boys listening to this, when you started seeing the videos of the entire raid being one-shot by Cthulhu's eye laser, you were just like, I need to be in this. I need to see what's going on in there. This looks so cool. Plus, it had the Dark Edge of Insanity. So, Temple of QIRAJ, I rate quite highly, just because of its scale and the memories I have with it. Not quite as highly though. It's going all the way back to vanilla, all the way backwards to Blackwing LAIR, which I do rate higher than Temple of Iron QIRAJ. The only issue I have, and it's not even the suppression room. I never minded the suppression room. I think it was an overblown meme. I thought it was fine. If you guys were on target with it, it wasn't too bad, and it was kind of funny. The super slow-mo animation was kind of fun. The only problem I ever have with Blackwing LAIR is the 3 dragons. The 3 drakes were really fucking dull. Other than that, though, what a raid. You start off with a really interesting mechanic. You've got mind control going on. And, again, you can't compare it to the classic that it is today, where people just know they can blast everything. We didn't know that. So the original way of doing Razorgore was to have hunters kiting dragons in circles. And then you were, like, min-maxing the DPS in certain adds. And then you had all this waiting and stuff when Razorgore finally unleashed. And the sort of foreboding of the guy... I was actually the mind control guy. My guild. I did the eggs. So me saying like 3 more eggs, 2 more eggs, and then we're going. Then it's followed up by Veil, which was just an awesome fight, man. You always felt bad for what you were doing, which is astonishing when you can make that happen, right? Absolutely astonishing when you can instill that into the players, because that's RPG. If you care about what you're doing. Broodlord Lash Layer is okay, but then you have the 3 drakes, but Chromagus, and then of course the ultimate Nefarian fight. Having Nefarious walk around, taunting you, before he eventually lands, and then the landing of the dragon, sending that fiery shockwave across the entire platform. And then it's mixed with that Blizzard humor of turning people into giraffes, breaking their weapons, right? It's funny, despite the fact it's almost as epic as the Illidan encounter. It's got that humor to it, which is what I expected from World of Warcraft. Super amazing. Next up on the list is going to be, and I know you hate me for it. I know you hate me for it. Trial of the Grand Crusader. How, Mike, are you putting this above Illidan and Zuluman and Firelands and Siege of Orgrimmar? How? I think Blizzard gets a really bad rap for Trial of the Grand Crusader, and I want to explain my context for why I moved it up here, because I did struggle with this choice. Trial of the Grand Crusader's biggest crime is that it followed Ulduar. That's its biggest crime. But Blizzard were really clever here. I believe that, genuinely. They were really, really clever with how they did this. They knew, because they put a legendary in Ulduar, Valnir of the Ancient Kings for the healers, that people were going to want to continue farming Ulduar. So they came up with a raid that wasn't a separate tier. It was just a supplement to Ulduar that had no trash and could be cleared. And every single boss in there was really good. Like, Lord Jaraxxus is still brought up to this day. The Northrend Beast is a fantastic fight with so much going on with it. The Twin Valkyr is really, really fun. You got to absolutely blast in that fight. And then Anubra Khan is an absolute homage to that boss after what happened in Wrath of the Lich King, where people were really pissed. And it supplemented you so much that you could then go back to Ulduar slightly stronger, and it didn't take up much of your week. It's what Battle of Mount Hyjal should have been. If Battle of Mount Hyjal was like this, where we just had these wars where the bosses were coming in, instead of those endless trash waves, it would be so much better. It would be remembered so much better, and I think they learned a lot from Battle of Mount Hyjal, making Trial of the Grand Crusader. And I will defend this raid to the death, because I think it was great. I think it was absolutely a great raid. It was a good idea to have a side tier, essentially, during a period where people are enjoying a really, really good raid, and still being able to continue doing that at the same time while getting stronger, because the gear was slightly better from Trial of the Grand Crusader. So I really rate this. I rate this raid very highly. I enjoyed it every week. If it wasn't for the faction champions, I'd probably rate it higher, but the faction champions are certainly on the hard mode. Heroic, I believe it was at the time. Absolutely were disastrously bad. So that's why it's down there. Next up then is the Eye of Eternity, a one-boss raid. But what a fight. What a fight. I loved Malygos, the Malygos encounter. I really loved it. I did not like that in 10-man it required like no melee, but in the big version, certainly to do it in its hard mode was so cool. The whole thing from starting in that magical palace to then flying around on discs. Yeah, all these people flying around on discs, and then eventually ending up on the dragons, which once people got used to how to control, made the fight so cool. And it was a really epic finale. Like, I loved Trial of the Grand... I loved the Eye of Eternity for that. It was a wonder to go and do it every week. Like, I enjoyed it. One thing, although they got Naxxramas wrong at the beginning of Wrath of the Lich King, one thing they did get right was having these side one-off intense raids where they just had a really good idea that didn't fit into Naxxramas, did not fit into the other environments, and were like, let's make a really cool boss on its own, a standalone boss. And sometimes, and you're going to see this in the next few choices, their standalone bosses are the best stuff they make. Where they could design an entire raid around one boss and then really throw just so many ideas at it. And I think Malygos was a great example of that. As was the next boss on this list, the next raid, which was MAGTHERIDON'S Lair. What a tremendous boss fight MAGTHERIDON'S Lair was. Although it started off pretty buggy, certainly its trash was problematic. MAGTHERIDON'S Lair, again, I just adored doing this every single week. Having everybody manage the cubes in order to channel into it, dealing the transition from the Warlock Infernal phase into the actual fight with MAGTHERIDON. It's not a hard fight. And I don't think, and some people mistake this with me particularly, I think, especially those who think I'm an elitist, that difficulty makes a raid, because that's just not the case. Otherwise, Sunwell would be higher up the list. Difficulty is only good if it's a good level of difficulty. Hard for the sake of hard never appeals to me. MAGTHERIDON'S Lair, just this giant colossal demon that shatters the roof and drops it all on you. The panic when that was coming, it's like, okay, the roof's shattering, make sure you get a position for the cubes. All that stuff made that super fun. Similarly with our next choice, GRUUL'S Lair. GRUUL'S Lair is one of my favorite raids. By a long... I mean, obviously it is. We're ranking the raids. But GRUUL'S Lair... I went back and farmed GRUUL'S Lair every week. And I didn't need anything. I was a tank. I didn't need the Dragon Spine trophy or anything like that. It was just the fact that I really enjoyed it. I thought the opening fight... was super cool. I loved that we had things like Moonkin tanks, we had mage tanks, we had other warriors swapping between each other, we had banishes going on, and then we had the actual boss, which needed to be managed in his own way, and the panic of as you work through the ads, and then this snowballing effect of success that happens with that first boss as you defeat each of the ads. And then the whole... I still have the clip, and Chris is going to put it in here, I think, of when we're finally onto the mage boss and the whole raid moving across the room to kill this last guy. And then, right, we're on the last guy. Let's get it done. Gruul itself, like, until we realized that Gruul could be, like, 10-manned, I think Nylum proved it at the time, you could, like, 15-man Gruul. Until that point, Gruul was just an obscene beast. Like, the constant growing threat of Gruul getting larger and larger and larger until he's, like, filling the room and shattering the whole raid, and that panic when Shatter came in and people are near you and you're trying to spread and do all that stuff. Like, I love Gruul. I love this fight so much. My next choice here is going to be Zul'Gurub, the original raid version in Classic, which I imagine a lot of you have done now, but let's talk about it from the vanilla context, which is what I'm talking about. So Zul'Gurub comes out as, and you got to remember what this is, it's basically the next UBRS. It's something to do in your off time, because guilds are 40-man, and ZG required 20. So you could sort this out for a Saturday, which is what our guild did. I'd run a ZG on a Saturday and things like that. And once again, practically every boss in there is really interesting and fun. Every single one of them requires some fun, from Mandakir to Jindo. All had some really intriguing way of dealing with it. Panther boss, and again, Hakar himself having all really cool mechanics. Which again, it brings back to the idea of Molten Core being a terrible raid, because they were fully capable of doing this in their dungeons and their off raids in Classic. And ZG is one of the fondest memories I had. The only thing I disliked about ZG was the Bijou acquisition to gain reputation, because I was the Bijou bank. So I had to manage the reputation for the guild, which wasn't fun. But actually being in there, and also cool items. As much as I'm not a fan of transmog, as many of you know, at the time we didn't have transmog. So seeing some of the ZG weapons was really kind of cool, especially Zinrock. So good. So good. And every visit we made to ZG, adored it. Super happy. Slightly higher than that, though. Going back to this idea of the magnificent one-boss raids is Onyxia's Lair, the original version. What a tremendous, tremendous raid. Again, fuck Molten Core. You had this raid that was just a few trash mobs, like TOGC, just a few trash mobs, and then you turn that corner and you look into that cave and you just see a fucking dragon waiting for you. Not a little dragon, a big, giant dragon. And going back to me originally playing World of Warcraft and this fantasy RPG, we'd obviously seen dragons out in the open world, and usually they kicked your ass. Not something that really happens in the game anymore, sadly. But to see this dragon just waiting, just brooding, the brood mother just waiting for you. And then you go in and it does that scream as it starts walking towards you. You're like, oh my god. But then you have that cool thing of the whole raid funneling into the room. And dealing with really fun mechanics like getting tail whipped and managing threat. And then she takes off into the sky where she's deep breath. The first time I saw deep breath, and it literally infernoed the entire room. I know that I died to it. It was spectacular. Like, everything about Onyxia's Lair just fills my heart with happiness. It really does. It's one of my favorite memories of World of Warcraft is looking into Onyxia's Lair for the very first time. And when Classic relaunched and we went to Onyxia's Lair, I just remember that feeling coming back, that joy, that gamer joy that's often missing in the more mechanical, strategic, mathematical, sort of more sterile environment that we treat raiding today. It just reminded me of the wonder and kind of childishness of just, it's a big old dragon and we're in a dragon's cave. Oh shit. Which hasn't been lost. Replaying RPGs in the last month or so on stream, playing Chrono Trigger and certainly Divinity, Original Sin 2, you see a dragon and it once again, it just fills you up with like, oh my god, it's a dragon. And you forget, which is why we're so excited for Wrathion coming back in Nathria. Sad times. So sticking with that dragon theme then, the Obsidian Sanctum above this as well. Obviously, I'm talking about Obsidian Sanctum 3 Drakes. Because the first time I went to the Obsidian Sanctum, I was like, what the hell is this? Like, the lava coming out of the sides was kind of cool, but I didn't really get it. I remember my first week with the guild, when the Wrath launched and we went out and we did Obsidian Sanctum, I was like, this is on the same thing as Malagos, and even Naxxramas is kind of shit. But then you learn, like, oh, you know, you don't have to kill those side drakes. It changes the fight entirely until you end up with Obsidian 3 Drakes. Or Sartharian 3 Drakes. And that's a fucking fight. And it's difficult for all the right reasons, because there are checkpoints to be met which are player controlled. Can you kill Vesperon in a certain amount of time? Can you deal with the underground as it goes on? And then that feeling of elation once the dragons are dead during the encounter. And sitting down with our raid leader to really like figure it out. Like, how are we going to do this? Who do we want here? What DPS cooldowns do we have available? How are we going to manage the breath from Sarthari and etc, etc. All these things. Whew, what a fight. Really, killing that was one of the greatest things I ever did. Fun story on the side note. I actually went to Alliance during this time. It was the first time I joined Method was about this time. When I came back to the Horde towards the end of the expansion and picked up my old warrior, which had killed Sartharian 3 Drakes originally, it was later in the expansion. So at that point, people were zerging it. So I was like guildless and looking for where to go. So I was like, oh, there's a pug for Sar 3 Zerg. So I was like, well, I've already killed this, like, originally. Of course, I can kill the Zerg version. So I joined the raid group. And I was being shit on for my gear. And I was like, what? And they were like, are you even defense caps? I really started getting some very toxic comments. I linked to my team. I was like, guys, I did this. I had not experienced it before. So I was like, guys, I did this when it was legit content. Like, I did this like when the game launched. Like, of course I could do this. They were like shitting on me hardcore. I think ULDUAR was out at the time and TOGC was out. TOTGC. And they were really being rude to me. So in an uncharacteristic, and I will say it's uncharacteristic of Preach Gaming, I turned the dragon on them, burned the whole raid, and killed them all. And then I went peace and Hearthstoned out. I said, I just don't get why you guys were such dicks. I really don't. A lot of angry whispers came my way. I was like, fuck you guys. Fucking, because they were genuinely like terrible players as well. They were just looking to get mounts, and they were just blasting stuff as hard as they could. Anyway. Moving on from the Obsidian Sanctum then, there's kind of a theme here. Is you probably think I like smaller raids, but that's not the case. It all depends in context. But the Ruins of KARAZHAN, which I think is superior to the Temple by a long way. The Ruins of KARAZHAN is a great side raid, like ZG. Every fight in there is so cool. I even love the Gauntlet fight. with the general coming, especially QIRAJ at the beginning, getting the books for your spells. But you think about the bosses in there. I know that Classic's out and people like hardcore farm this, but we didn't at the time. Right, it was a progress raid to deal with this stuff, and dealing with a Syrian at the end. My first time killing a Syrian was actually a raid that got me invited into my Nax guild. So I got a whisper as a priest saying people knew my name, because obviously the community in vanilla was different. So they were looking for a healer, and my name was being passed around as one of the best healers on the server at the time. I didn't know that, but I got a whisper from a stranger who was like, hey, are you free to come to, are you saved or whatever to Runes of KARAZHAN? I was like, no, I haven't done it this week. I already had my spell upgrades from the raid. So I was like, no, I've not done it. It's like, oh, well, you know, blah, blah, blah has recommended you. Do you want to come? And they needed a priest to mana drain Moam, which is why they were looking for a priest. So I was like, yeah, sure, why not? Because I clicked, like, shift-clicked the guy and saw he was from one of the top guilds on the server, a Nax farming guild. And I was like, yeah, sure. And I came along and I blasted. Not that I was really trying to do it, but I just healed as I healed, and it was... And then they were like, do you want to join our guild? I was like, yeah, okay. I instantly like skipped up to a top tier guild from that one run of Runes of KARAZHAN. But I remember everything so clearly about that. Every trash pack, everything I needed to do there. So fun. Next raid on the list then. This should be hype for those of you who are expecting the Burning Crusade Classic or anticipating it. Serpentshrine Cavern. What a fucking raid this is. God damn. God damn. Several of my probably top 10 bosses are in Serpentshrine Cavern. Not Hydros. Not Hydros. Hydros is fine. I am talking about SSC after the trash was fixed. If you don't know, in the original SSC, when you could go in originally, the trash 2 Hydros was so hard that by the time you'd cleared the trash 2 Hydros, it would respawn behind you, and it was 1 bridge's worth of trash. And it was awful, especially the giant monstrosities that used to just turn to the raid and breathe all over them and kill the whole raid. It could take 30 to 40 minutes to clear that trash. It was awful. And then it would be respawning while you were trying to pull the boss. But after that, it just gets so much better. Leotheras, easily one of my top encounters of all time. Leotheras was so fun. Morrogrim, also really cool. And it was the time. It was also a big learning experience for me when Morrogrim came. I was the raid leader. And I was playing a Holy Paladin. But I had to go prot for Morrogrim. It was the first time we were like, oh, okay, maybe we should try prot paladins here. And then we also swapped out our warrior tank to go to a feral druid tank for Morrogrim. And it really opened my eyes as a raid leader to all these different possibilities of things that could happen. The council fight, I really love that. I love having fights where multiple people are doing multiple roles. And that was a big one. Moving around the room as a team to sort of deal with this ever-changing encounter. And then, of course, the moment, the most memorable moment for me is you finally click the final console and the bridge raises out of the water to Lady Vash. So epic. So epic. And the Lady Vash encounter itself was just incredible. It had everything you want. It had so much going on. It had like a relatively slow build first phase. Then it had a management phase. Then it got more intense. And then the final phase of Lady Vash, which gets super intense with the puddles landing, and you have no room left to deal with Vash as she's starting to eradicate you, and it's a race against time, so your heart is pounding. All of that. Loved every fucking second of it. Loved every second of it. And also, as a side note story, Lady Vash and Illidan were on my first raid when I decided to move up. So for those of you who don't know, I really wanted to keep pushing with Black Temple coming. Like, I was so full of raid jism that I just couldn't wait for the Black Temple. My guild at the time, though, was fucking done. They were so done. I had pushed them to the brink of exhaustion, and they were like, dude, we just want to take it a bit easy now. We were all really good friends. They were like, it's time you moved on, because they knew that the quality of the players we were playing with were not going to keep up with where I was. And they wanted what was best for me. So we had like a big party send-off. We all got drunk together. I played with them a lot. But I joined my new guild, which skipped me forward. I think something like world rank wise, it skipped me from about I want to say world 3000th to world 40th was my jump that I went. And on my first trial raid night in this new guild, which would have been kill count lost, they had me tank Illidan, which I hadn't done yet, and nailed it, which was really cool, because one of the best messages I've ever had playing World of Warcraft was the melee officer of the guild said that's the fastest I've seen anybody adapt to something they've not done before. And I was so happy with that. And I mean, I was so serious about raiding at the time. I wish I could get my head back into that period of how I was in the Burning Crusade, because I was so focused on every yard I moved with my warrior to make it as good as it could be for the DPS. But at the same time, we had to do SSC. And they didn't know that the Striders that came out, which typically were kited by like an Ellie Shaman or typically a Warlock, because they pulsed AoE fear. So you couldn't melee tank them. So you had to have a caster kite them in a circle. And occasionally that would lead to problems, if threat problems. Because they needed to die. So occasionally someone would pull aggro, and then that thing would turn and it would fear a load of people, blah, 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 blah. But I had learned how to do this trick as a Tauren Prot Warrior, where you could intercept Berserker Stance, Berserker Rage, so you were immune to fear, intercept, which would stun the Strider in a very set location, swap back to Prot Stance and do like this little back step where you were kind of tippy-tapping your buttons, and it put you exactly half a yard outside of the pulsing AoE fear, which meant a tank could tank the Striders. And that made it infinitely easier. So on this same night, we killed Illidan, and the tank Erebus, who became such a close friend of mine that he came and stayed at my house. It was the first time from an online community someone not only traveled to my country to meet me, but also stayed at my house, and we just sat and raided in my room and had pizza and shit. I mentioned, it's like, they were planning how to do Vash, right? They were talking about it in the tank channel. It's like, well, you just want me to tank the Striders? And I just got all these question marks. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? I was like, oh yeah, I'm a Tauren. I can tank the Striders. I've done it before. And they're like, are you joking? And they'd never heard of this. I was like, no, I can do that. And they're like, all right, let's see this. Anyway, we pull, the Strider spawns, I go and do my thing, and I'm stood tanking it. And in the tank chat, these two Greeks, Marathi and Erebus, are just like, what in the actual fuck am I seeing right now? What is this? And it turned out that the biggest problem that guild had ever had with Lady Vash was the Striders. And there I was, and I just went, lol. I remember just typing, lol. And they were like, no, fuck you, man. We have wiped so many times the Striders, and you could just fucking tank them. This is ridiculous. As you can tell, I have a lot of good memories of SSC. Good luck to you to go and play TBC Classic, because the next raid on this list, as we get into the finale here, is the Eye. The Eye. Which is... Why am I rating it above SSC? It's purely because of how amazing the Kael'thas fight is. But it does have Void Reaver in there. Now, I like Void Reaver. It's Loot Reaver. It's very easy. But it's still fun. And I did this as a Warrior and a Warlock. When I was trying to mix it up in my guild. Because I was getting a little, I was getting a little bored. So I tried to mix it up in my guild. And yeah, it was still fun. Solarian, I don't like. I did not like Solarian. But Allah was incredible. Like, Allah was so fun, especially as a tank. And there were good ways. You could do tricks on that fight in order to tank it. And I remember having like a lesson with other tanks on the server from other guilds. Like, we were the #1 Horde guild on the server. And the #2 Horde guild and the #3 whispered me to ask how I was doing Allah, because... they had been struggling with Allah and had contacted our raid leader, Erebus, about how the tanking when Allah was down was happening. How were they dealing with it? Because he does this like spinny knockback and all this kind of stuff. And they were like, oh, I don't know. Mike deals with that, but we haven't got a problem with it. It's like, okay, but how do you stop Allah like killing somebody or doing this? And it's like, I don't know. I don't do that. Mike does it. And it's never happened. So... I then got these whispers like, what are you doing at Allah? So I then had this lesson with the guys where I was like, okay, what you want to do is you want to wait for this. Then you move slightly this way and then you intercept in that way. And that way you kind of go through the knockback swirl into the right position. And then it always works every single time. And from that, I spawned so many friendships. with those guys, and ended up doing loads of world content with them, killing all the world raid leaders and things like that, the world faction leaders, all that kind of stuff. It really opened a lot of friendships for me. Then we get to the Kael'thas fight, which I think is, it's so close to Illidan, it's crazy. Because think about this fight. And again, I love fights where people are doing multiple roles, and this is like the epitome of that. Not only do you have to, you have the lock tank again, but you have to separate them out in a certain way for later in the fight when they're all going to come back to life. Then you have this period of time where you're getting legendary weapons, which is a great feel, and you're swapping your weapon in for this legendary. You've got all the mind control going on, and you just look. Sometimes when I was tanking on that fight, I would just take in my surroundings, and I'm seeing like melee team alpha, like a squad of Marines, just run across the room to deal one thing, as the range are going this way. But it wasn't even a case of melee and range, so it'd be like, but two melee are going to peel off, and then these two healers who were dealing with this, they're going to come together and go over this way. And you just saw this whole like puzzle chessboard of people moving in all different directions. And then you had the part where Kael'thas rises to the sky, shatters all the glass in the room, and becomes enormous for the big finale. Oh, Blizzard. So good. Moving on then, which is difficult. I actually kind of almost put this below SSC in the eye, but it is the NIGHTHOLD. The NIGHTHOLD is fantastic. It is. It's got everything from eating cake to silly scorpions fights to extremely difficult fights. It does have Botanist in there, which is why I have a slightly sour taste about the NIGHTHOLD. But it's more than made up for with the Gul'dan encounter. It's got two bad encounters, as far as I'm concerned. It has two encounters that I really dislike, which are Elisand, this is on Mythic, Elisand and Botanist. But excluding those two, everything else is so good. Even Chromatic Anomaly, for all its all the problems NIGHTHOLD had at the time, which is like the way the bosses were encountered, your gear didn't matter until they eventually nerfed them. They just nerfed the bosses outright. I had a big war with these real dumb fucks on Twitter, because we checked, we went back through everybody's logs from first kills for weeks and showed that the boss kill times weren't really changing despite gear. Then they nerfed the encounters, and so the boss times did start to change. And then people whispered saying, "You were wrong, you dumb bastard." I was like, they literally just nerfed the raid, you arseholes. But that's the way it goes sometimes. But Croesus, what an encounter with that bridge cracking, and they tuned it so well so that if you did it on Mythic, it genuinely was like, as he was about to wipe the raid, you would kill that boss. I even liked the healer boss. I forget the name of it now, but it was the one in the garden where you had to run in a circle. I thought that was kind of cool. You had the debuff management going on there, then you had these different transitions and phases, and then of course Gul'dan transitioning back into Illidan. What a great finale to that raid. Like overall, the NIGHTHOLD really stands up as a raid I enjoyed every time we went to farm it. I had no issue with the NIGHTHOLD at all. I very much enjoyed it. Besides Botanist. Star Augur, I don't rate it as highly as many, but it is good. Now it gets hard. We're on the final four, by the way. We're on the final four. BLACKROCK Foundry. The third and fourth place here were really tough. BLACKROCK Foundry is extremely good. Extremely good. It has some stinkers, though. It has some stinkers, which kind of put it below the next choice, which also has a couple of stinkers, as most big raids do. But BLACKROCK Foundry, Hans and Franz made me laugh. It was the first time I turned World of Warcraft sounds on, I think in a couple of years, was to listen to Hans and Franz. The Iron Maidens, I think it's called Chromag, whichever the big guy was, that grabbed you all with the hands. Min-maxing the crap out of that. The stinkers in here for me are Beastlord Darmok, Operator Thulgar. I need to explain that because people love Operator Thulgar. It's a very, very strict dance fight, like I talked about with Hellier. Like, everything on that fight is massively on rails. So the progress, at least from my perspective, on that fight was just learning the moves. And then the boss died. So I didn't enjoy Operator Thulgar for that very reason. It's nice when the whole... I get why people like those fights, because the whole raid is synergizing and coming together as one. I prefer some personal flair. BLACKROCK Foundry has two of my favorite bosses of all time, though. One is the Blast Furnace. I adore the Blast Furnace. I would really recommend, if you want some context to that, the best I could say to you is check the channel for the interview I did with Roger Brown, where we talked about the Blast Furnace for like 30 minutes, because we both feel very strongly about that fight, and it's just sad. It's sad that it's disregarded by a lot of people, because it isn't the last fight, and the last fight is Blackhand. which is just incredible. Like, Blackhand is an incredible fight, but the Blast Furnace is right up there as well. So its mythic version is right up there. So the context I can give you that is to listen to me and Roger Brown just gush about the Blast Furnace for like half an hour, because it had so much going on, man. It was so cool. But as did Blackhand, and Blackhand is possibly one of the best final bosses to a raid tier, besides our next choice. That's all I'm going to say to BLACKROCK Foundry. It's incredible. It's got like a couple of stinkers like Gruul, Beast Lord. I did not like the new version of Gruul. Gruul was much better in his previous incarnation, but whatever. ICECROWN Citadel is third on our list. Number 3, ICECROWN Citadel. We're in the top 3 now. ICECROWN Citadel. God, I mean, we should start with the Lich King fight, because they nailed it. They nailed it. We talk about Illidan's epic encounter. Arthas is better. It's close. Maybe it's close, but it's right up there. That's what I mean. It's really close. It's cinematic. It's intense. It's interesting. It's dragged down a little bit below Illidan because of the stupid plague mechanic infest, which was just tedious. But other than that, it was fine. Defile was terrifying every time it was cast. The spirits. God knows where we would have been if Paragon didn't discover the spirit soaking mechanic. Or the spirit soaking way of doing things. I have no idea. ICC does have that thing of getting the buff every week, which you couldn't really ignore, which kind of changed it. It also had gated end wing bosses, but it's gated, but how do you ignore Professor Putricide for being such an awesome, hilarious encounter? You can't. Blood Queen, massive damage buffs, while you're also biting each other. So many good memories. But it does have a couple of stinkers. The Blood Council, shooting orbs back into the sky and not being able to move is not particularly fun, especially if you're a tank. The healing boss in there is nothing compared to Sulong, Dreamweaver, or whatever it was. Fucking healers just bouncing around a room on their own. they hated it. But then you've got Syndragosa, which is just fantastic. It's the same as BLACKROCK Foundry. Like, it's just, it's a wonderful place to be. I don't even mind Gunship. I know people call it Loot Ship because it was easy. And again, difficulty doesn't really make or break a boss. The actual fight is cool. I liked the fact that we were like pirates invading another boat. I think Blizzard kind of nailed it. It's not hard, but it was really fun. Like, I enjoyed the shit out of it. The only fight I didn't like in there, and I forget which one it was. It's one of the two before Putricide that just made it so you couldn't hit if that little bouncy orb hit you. That always pissed me off. But other than that, there's not really a bad boss in there, I don't think. I'm going through them in my head and just good times. Being in ICC was so much fun. We could make the Saurfang intro a little smaller, though. Eh? Let's not do that again. Number 2, which obviously reveals number 1 for most of you. KARAZHAN. The original dungeon version. What a joy. What an absolute joy. As somebody who progress rated this, which I don't think will happen in TBC for most of you, because you've done, no doubt, even for transmog reasons, you've done KARAZHAN a million times, or you've soloed chests at this point. As somebody who progress rated this, what a time. Seeing the war amongst our server to defeat the Curator for the first time. Coming up with how many different mechanics to deal with Morose while he was using the most eloquent, amazing way of shitting on your entire life ever. Huntsman. There's, besides the basement bosses, which nobody ever did, we then had, you know, you've got, it's so fantastical. And I mean that in all ways. And I think Blizzard is at their absolute best when they put the fantasy into their RPG. When the fantasy lets them run wild with magics and craziness. And they even re-inspired that in the dungeon. I know it's a mega dungeon, but everything about KARAZHAN, especially the optional bosses. I forget the name of the dragon where you had to absorb the beams, but that was super fun with people getting confused about the beams and people being super powerful. The demon, who sacrificed you on his altar to get enchants, but they also made the optional bosses kind of harder than the normal bosses, which I think is so wise. Like, you can skip this guy. He's got cool stuff. You know, he's got a good enchant on him or something. But you can skip him if you want to. And then they put in summonable bosses. There's so many elements that exist in this one raid of KARAZHAN that just don't exist in any raid anymore. And it blows my mind. We used to have summonable bosses, extra bosses, if you'd done certain things out in the open world in dungeons, right? We had that in Wrath of the Lich King, and it's just kind of faltered off now. In fact, they try and make it as convenient as possible. If there's a seasonal boss, there's just a queue for it, and you go in and you kill it and you go out. Whereas, I don't feel anymore that doing something outside of the dungeon or the raid gets you anything. Whereas KARAZHAN, you had this massive quest line to summon Nightbane. Nightbane's not there. You had all these optional extras that were harder than the originals, but you could kind of gear up from the base bosses to then go back and try the other bosses, and I loved all that. KARAZHAN is just fucking amazing, man. It's so good. And then Prince Malchezaar, which, seeing those Infernals, I was the raid leader as a Holy Paladin here, and watching trying to plan the Infernals out for my team. I know most people will probably blast it. And I'm kind of sad about this. When TBC comes out, I've no doubt people will just blast KARAZHAN, which is a shame. It is a shame, because that you can't go back to that 15-minute long Prince Malchezaar fight because you were worried about the threat in Phase 2 and how much it would wreck your tank, so you needed everyone to blast there. So you had people wanding Phase 1 and all these wonderful things that we came up with to try and get around these problems, whereas we'll probably just blast it when it comes out, which is a shame. And of course, the #1 raid of all time in World of Warcraft is ULDUAR. And I don't think we'll ever get it back. I think like Kara's, and maybe we will. I think ULDUAR is a fluke in how good it was. I feel like it was a fluke because they've never been able to recreate as good as ULDUAR. They've come close with individual encounters, the Gul'dan fight and those kind of things, but they've never been able to recreate the magic of ULDUAR. And it's a shame that we don't have anything like that again, ever. Like, you know, BLACKROCK Foundry is incredible, but ULDUAR just wins. And why does it win? It takes you on such an adventure. It starts you with the best vehicle fight. And people memed me on this. That Flame Leviathan is a great fight. Like, it's a vehicle fight, which people are like, oh, a vehicle fight. And, you know, no good, no good. No, this is a good vehicle fight where the team, the raid had to work together as a team. Everybody came together. You're flinging people onto this giant tank. You're dropping tar pools to slow them down. You're stacking pyrite. You're fetching pyrite. You're retrieving people on rescue missions during that fight. It's really good. XT. Everybody remembers XT. Like, even the Furnace Master is fine. I liked Razor Scale. Like, Razor Scale wasn't a problem for me. It wasn't hard, but it was fine. Algalon. Having then we have an optional order boss in the council of how you want to deal with it. Do you want damage buffs going to last phase? And then you have I Choose You Steelbreaker, which is just pushes it to the extreme. And you're like, wow, just the order of these bosses dramatically changes it. Which you can look at Council of Blood and say, isn't that the same? It's like, no. The way that fight could ramp up from easy mode to extreme hard mode just with the way you did the boss's order is so good. Mimiron, Freya, even Hodir. Like, Hodir hard mode is still fun. Like, today. It's still fun to do. It's still really fun. Thorim was hit and miss. I didn't particularly enjoy Thorim or whatever Sif's achievement was to deal with her. The weakest boss in there for me is General Vezax. I think that's his name. The guy before you fight Yogg-Saron. Didn't enjoy that. Didn't enjoy that very much. It was kind of tedious. But other than that, I thought it was... Everything about ULDUAR is incredible. And, of course, we go back to this optional hard mode, pushing the red button, ignoring certain ads like you did with Freya. All these elements that Blizzard have said time and time again, they don't want to overuse that. And I'm like, you've never done it since. I get you can't have a big red button every encounter, but you've really not done anything with this since. The closest we could have is, like, you could do Council of Blood in the easiest order, but it's the same result. Which I would equate to the Steelbreaker fight. Nothing like Mimiron hard mode, which created such an extraordinary encounter. But there it is, guys. Those are my raids ranked throughout all the history of World of Warcraft, minus the couple that I had to sit out of due to being a father and all things like that. But I know that disturbed some of you in some of my choices. I hope they make sense. But thank you very much for watching. I look forward to seeing you all this as well. Bye-bye.